nephew Marcus was 16 years old when he stopped sleeping. Not insomnia, not anxiety, not the usual teenage stuff. He stopped sleeping because he said that every time he closed his eyes, he saw what he'd found on his computer. And after 3 weeks of watching him deteriorate, the weight loss, the shaking hands, the way he'd go completely still if anyone walked behind him, we finally got him to talk. What he told us changed the way I think about the internet. Welcome back to Grinning Grave. Tonight's story was submitted to us by a listener who calls herself HallowThread_29, who says this happened to her nephew 2 years ago. She asked us to change his name. We did. Everything else, she says, is exactly as it happened. Her words, not mine. Let's begin. You have to understand who Marcus was before any of this. He was 16, quiet, the kind of kid who got good grades without trying too hard and spent most of his free time on his computer. Not unusual for a teenager. He played games, watched YouTube, had a Discord server with a group of online friends he'd known for years. Normal stuff. His mom, my sister Karen, had always been relaxed about his internet use. He'd never given her a reason not to be. No red flags, no concerning behavior, no late-night arguments about screen time. He was responsible. He was sensible. He was exactly the kind of kid this happens to because nobody was watching. It started, as far as we can piece together, on a Thursday night in October. Marcus had been working on a school project, a research paper on cryptography and internet privacy. The kind of topic that sounds dry until you start pulling on the threads. He was looking for primary sources, real case studies, and somewhere in that search, he went somewhere he shouldn't have. He didn't tell anyone for 2 days. The first sign something was wrong was Saturday morning. Karen came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table, fully dressed, at 6 a.m., just sitting. No phone, no coffee, no book, just sitting in the silence staring at the wall. She asked him if he was okay. He said he was fine. He was not fine. We know what Marcus found because eventually, weeks later, he told us. By that point, he'd already seen a therapist, already had the nightmares, already lost 11 pounds in 3 weeks. But he needed to say it out loud. He needed someone to know. So here's what happened that Thursday night, as best as we understand it. Marcus had been researching the dark web for his paper, not accessing it, just reading about it. Academic papers, journalism, security blogs. He was curious about how it worked, what was actually on it, how people found their way into it. Standard research rabbit hole stuff. Somewhere in that process, he found a forum. Not on the dark web, on the regular internet. A forum that looked at first glance like any other security and privacy community. Lots of technical discussion. Lots of people who clearly knew what they were talking about. The kind of place where you'd expect to find exactly the kind of source material a student writing about internet privacy would want. But there was a subforum, locked behind a registration wall with a waiting period and a short application process. The application asked a few questions about his technical background and why he wanted access. Marcus answered honestly. He was a student, he was curious, he was researching. They approved him in 40 minutes. He should have found that strange. Approval processes for exclusive forums don't usually take 40 minutes. But he was 16 and excited and didn't think about it. He clicked into the subforum. The first thing he noticed was that there were no usernames. Every post, every reply, every thread was authored by a string of random characters. 20 digits, letters and numbers, different every time. No avatars, no profile pages, no way to identify or track who was saying what. The second thing he noticed was the content. It wasn't illegal. That's the thing that made it so hard to process. Nothing in that forum broke any law he could name, but it was documenting something that should not have been possible. The forum was a repository, an archive. Hundreds of threads going back years, each one meticulously documenting a different person. A private individual, not a public figure, in extraordinary, granular detail. Not celebrities, not politicians, not anyone famous, ordinary people. A retired teacher in Ohio, a college student in Edinburgh, A family in rural Portugal. A man in his 50s who lived alone in a small town in rural Japan. Each thread followed one person, their daily routine, their location, their relationships, their finances, their fears, assembled entirely from publicly available information, social media, public records, data broker sites, old forum posts, but organized with a precision and thoroughness that was terrifying. These people had no idea they were being watched. Marcus told us he felt sick reading it, but he couldn't stop. He kept clicking, thread after thread, each one a complete portrait of a stranger's life, assembled without their knowledge, maintained with an obsessive consistency that suggested whoever was running this had been doing it for a very long time. He was 4 threads deep when he found the one that made his blood go cold. The thread was titled with a string of numbers and letters like all the others, but when Marcus clicked into it and started reading, it was about him. Not someone who looked like him, not someone with a similar name. Him, Marcus, his full name in the first post, his address, his school, his schedule. First period starts at 8:10 a.m., lunch at 12:35, chess club on Tuesdays, home by 4:15 unless there's practice. His Discord username, his Steam profile, his Reddit account that he'd never told anyone about. The one he used to post about anxiety and loneliness at 2 in the morning. A photo taken from across the street through the front window of his house, him at his desk, at his computer. The photo was dated 6 weeks ago. Marcus closed the laptop. He sat in his room in the dark for 3 hours without moving. Then he opened it again, because some part of him needed to know how much they knew, needed to understand the size of what he was dealing with, and kept reading. The thread had 847 posts, going back 2 years. They had been watching him since he was 14 years old. There were posts he almost recognized, moments from his life described from the outside. The week he broke up with his first girlfriend, his parents' divorce, the night he'd stayed up until 4 a.m. playing video games and had then gone outside and sat on the porch steps for an hour, and he remembered that night vividly because it was the loneliest he'd ever felt. And now he understood why he'd had the strange sensation of being observed, because someone had been watching. The most recent post in the thread was dated 2 days earlier. It contained a single line. Subject has begun researching us. Thread status, active.
Marcus closed the laptop again.
This time he didn't open it for a week. Karen called me on a Tuesday. She said Marcus had stopped going to school. He'd stopped eating regular meals. He'd taped black construction paper over every window in his room, and when she'd asked him why, he'd said very quietly, because they can see through glass. That's when she knew something was seriously wrong. She took him to their family doctor, who referred them to a therapist, who Marcus saw twice before he finally broke down and told the whole story. The therapist contacted Karen immediately after that session, not because Marcus was in danger of harming himself. He wasn't. But because what he described was specific enough and consistent enough and corroborated by details he couldn't have invented, that she felt it needed to be taken seriously. Karen called me. I drove the 3 hours to their house that same night. Marcus sat at the kitchen table and walked us through everything. He was methodical about it, the way traumatized people sometimes are, not emotional, just precise. He'd clearly been rehearsing how to explain it in his head for weeks. He pulled up the forum on his laptop. It was gone. Not the main forum. That was still there. The subforum was gone. His account was gone. The approval email had disappeared from his inbox. When he searched his browser history for the URL he'd used to access it, it returned nothing. Not a 404, not a redirect, nothing, as if the address itself had been scrubbed from his history. But he'd screenshotted it. 17 screenshots, taken in a panic the night he'd found his own thread. His hands had been shaking when he took them. You could see the slight blur on some, the way the screen was slightly tilted. But the content was legible. We spent 2 hours going through them. The posts were exactly as he'd described. The level of detail was extraordinary. The methodology, the way the profiles were assembled from fragments of public data, was meticulous. We reported it to the police. They were sympathetic but honest, without an active URL, without a way to identify the forum operators, without evidence of direct threat or illegal content. There was very little they could do. We reported it to the FBI's Cybercrime Division. We received an automated acknowledgement. Nothing else. We hired a private cybersecurity consultant who spent a week trying to trace the forum. He found nothing, not a dead server, not a cached version, not a trace in any archive. It was as if it had never existed, except for 17 screenshots and a 16-year-old boy who couldn't sleep. In the months after, Karen and I did our own research. We wanted to understand what Marcus had stumbled into. We talked to cybersecurity professionals, to journalists who cover online privacy, to researchers who study surveillance culture. We put together the most coherent picture we could. Here's what we think happened. There are communities online, not on the dark web, not in any space that requires special access, that practice something called OSINT aggregation, open source intelligence. It's the practice of assembling detailed profiles of individuals using only publicly available information. It's used legitimately by journalists, by law enforcement, by private investigators. But there are corners of the internet where it's practiced as something else entirely. Not for money, not for blackmail or harassment, at least not directly, but as a form of power. The knowledge that you know everything about someone who doesn't know you exist. That you can reconstruct their entire life from fragments they scattered across the internet without thinking. That you are, in a very real sense, closer to them than most of the people in their lives. Some of them call it collecting. The forum Marcus found appears to have been one such community. The profiles they maintained were extraordinarily detailed, but the profiles themselves weren't the end goal. Based on the thread structure, and the way posts were written, our cybersecurity consultant believed the goal was the process, the accumulation, the watching. They weren't going to do anything with what they knew. They just wanted to know, which is in some ways more disturbing than any alternative, because it means there's no escalation to watch for, no moment where it tips into something actionable, just an endless, patient, invisible observation that the subject never finds out about. Unless they go looking, unless, like Marcus, they stumble into the wrong forum on a Thursday night while researching a school project and find themselves already inside. Marcus is 18 now. He still lives with Karen. He's better, genuinely better. Therapy helped, time helped. The slow process of rebuilding a sense of safety helped. He went back to school. He graduated. He got into a good university, and he's studying, of all things, cybersecurity. Karen says he wants to understand it, wants to know everything about how these systems work, how surveillance is built, how profiles are assembled. She used to worry that was unhealthy, that he was picking at an old wound, but his therapist told her something that stuck. He's not going back into the dark. He's learning how to carry a light. He still doesn't use social media. He uses a VPN. He's meticulous about his digital footprint in a way that most people will never be, because most people have never had a reason to think about it. He keeps the 17 screenshots in a folder on an encrypted hard drive. Not because he needs them, not because he's still afraid, but because he wants to remember that it was real. That somewhere out there, in a forum that no longer exists or has simply moved, someone spent 2 years assembling a portrait of a 14-year-old boy from the pieces he left behind online without knowing. And the only reason Marcus found out was because he went looking for them first. HoloThread_29 ended her submission with a message she asked us to read directly. She wrote, "I'm not telling this story to frighten people off the internet. I'm telling it because Marcus asked me to. He said, tell them to look at what they've left behind. Not what they're posting now. What they posted years ago when they were young and careless and didn't think anyone was paying attention. The old forum accounts, the old usernames, the old profiles. Go find them before someone else does." He said, "Most of them won't find anything, but some of them will." Think about that tonight. That was episode 2 of Grinning Grave. If this one got under your skin, good. Share it with someone who spends too much time online. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment with the oldest username you can remember using. Let's see what comes up. Until next time, go check your old accounts.